Morbius might not have set the world on fire, but regardless of what you, or really any critics, might think of the movie, it has made it almost inevitable that Sony is going to continue forward with their plans for their own Marvel universe, aptly named the Sony Spider-Man universe. But that could be a really good thing, depending on how Sony goes about handling future releases. But that alone begs the question, who could we see in those future releases? Who would make sense to bring into this cinematic venture? Well, let's take a look at those that have been discussed as possibilities, or that would make sense given their connections to confirmed characters, and figure out how they could fit. So without any further ado, let's go ahead and dive right into it. Let's start this off with a character whose appearance has been talked about for years at this point. So much so that the fact that she hasn't already appeared on the big screen, probably the largest surprise here. Silver Sable is a character whose film Sony has been trying to get off the ground since back when they were still producing the Amazing Spider-Man movies. Back then, the sovereign monarch of Symkaria was slated to be a part of their fledgling Marvel universe alongside the Sinister Six movie and Amazing Spider-Man 3. However, after the Amazing Spider-Man movies were ended prematurely, with the webhead being rebooted as part of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, many assumed that Sable's film also got the kibosh. But that doesn't seem to be the case, as rumors have been circulating for a while that the character is still slotted to appear within Sony's universe, either as part of the Kraven the Hunter film that is not too far off on the horizon, or even the planned Madam Web movie. Either way, the character is reportedly supposed to debut in one of those, then get her own movie later on. As far as what role she could play in the movies, that's a little bit questionable. Usually Sable only gets involved in a situation if her country is directly threatened, or her mercenary group gets hired out to take care of it. So maybe Kraven the Hunter will wind up going to Symkaria, and that will cause her to get pulled into the action somehow. I'm not entirely sure how her appearance in Madam Web would really work out, but I'm sure someone somewhere has an idea, so that could probably work out. Regardless of where she debuts, her icy demeanor is sure to leave a heck of an impression on audiences everywhere. Of course, we also know that we're getting a version of Spider-Man, especially since the end credit scene for Morbius directly name drops him. That's some pretty solid evidence that he exists right there. However, the question here is which Spider-Man will fit the bill for this SMU. For the longest while, it looked like Sony wanted Tom Holland's version to eventually leave the MCU and jump over to their own universe. However, after No Way Home, word has been going around that Sony intends to leave him with Disney and Marvel, and instead have another wall crawler for their movies, with Andrew Garfield's Amazing Spider-Man being the one that's getting the most positive buzz. Considering the fact that Sony's initial plans for this universe started with that Amazing Spider-Man, it would be a little bit of poetic justice to have him be the one that they go with. Of course, it is possible that they could go with a different Spider-Man entirely, perhaps even one that isn't named Peter Parker. This is one that doesn't really have a ton of evidence, but has still been talked about quite a bit. Whenever someone is talking about having a Spider-Man within Sony's universe, eventually someone is going to bring up Miles Morales. And for good reason. He is a fan favorite character who Sony has already seen a ton of success with in the cinematic space, thanks to his starring role in Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse. So naturally, it would make sense for the studio to attempt to replicate that success within live action. It's probably not nearly as easy as that sounds, but it's really not that bad of an idea, all things considered. Now, the thing about Miles as a character, though, is that he kinda works best when he's serving as a replacement Spider-Man of sorts. His story has always hinged on him having to deal with the weight of carrying on the legacy of the wall crawler. So maybe Miles could come in and be introduced in a movie alongside a previous Spider-Man. Then at that movie's end, he'd take over as the main webhead. In the Morbius trailers and such, we got to see some graffiti of Spider-Man that looked a bit like the Tobey Maguire version. So maybe that's the one they could go with, giving us a Spider-Man 4, ending with him either dying or stepping away, allowing Miles to take over as the main Sony Spider-Man. That admittedly might be a little bit of a pie-in-the-sky sort of idea, but hey, what's the fun in speculating if you can't just throw out some wild and wacky stuff every once in a while? And really, in regards to wild and wackiness, this is pretty tame. So, okay, if Adrian Toomes is now in the Sony universe as opposed to the MCU, what are the chances that Scorpion also made the leap over? Not super high, actually, as all of the news broadcasts that we heard in that end credit scene of Morbius only really mentioned one mysterious prisoner showing up, that being, of course, Adrian Toomes. However, because of the manner in which Scorpion was introduced in Homecoming, his character arc is kind of intrinsically tied to Vulture. So he kind of sort of needs him to continue forward. Which probably means that we'll never get Scorpion as a meaningful villain within the MCU. So when you think about it, it would only make sense if he also jumped over. If for no other reason than they'd be able to continue that storyline they had already started with the arachnid villain. But as I said, I don't really see that being super likely. Don't get me wrong, I'd love to see him become a proper baddie on the big screen. I'm just not going to be holding my breath. But I figured I should bring him up because if I didn't, at least one of you down in the comments would probably say something about it. So here you go, here's your Scorpion mention. One of the upcoming movies that Sony has coming down the pipeline is one centered around Madam Web, who is apparently going to be portrayed by Dakota Johnson. Beyond that, we don't really know much about the movie. However, some rumors have been floating around about who could serve as the movie's primary antagonist, with signs seemingly pointing towards Charlotte Witter fitting the bill. For those of you who don't know who that is, I can't really say I blame you, as she hasn't exactly been in a ton of comics. She is a character who went under the name Spider-Woman for a short while, and wound up coming into conflict with Madam Web alongside Jessica Drew, aka the true Spider-Woman. Oh, and Witter is the granddaughter of the original Madam Web. That's kind of important to know. Fundamental part of the conflict, actually. Outside of some rumors and speculation though, we cannot actually say for sure if she will appear within the movie. That being said, I for one cannot think of a better character to serve as an antagonist for a Web solo movie. Most of the people who wind up opposing her would really serve better as baddies within bigger team-ups. So really, Witter does seem like the best option, in my opinion. Of course, if we're gonna have Witter in the Madam Web film, it could be a fantastic place to introduce Spider-Woman to the Sony universe. But which one am I talking about? There have been a lot of people who have gone under that name. Well, in this case, I'm talking about Jessica Drew specifically. At least I am for this entry. Drew premiering in the Madam Web film would more than likely require a bit of modification to her origin story, but it could be a fantastic platform from which to launch her own solo series, which could actually make for an interesting idea. One of the most discussed issues with the entire concept of Sony's Spider-Man universe is the idea of us having two separate wall crawlers existing within movies at the same time, which could get confusing for casual audiences. What if, instead of having a regular Spider-Man series in the Sony universe, we instead have him serving as an overarching character who pops up on occasion but doesn't have his own solo series? And instead we have Spider-Woman with her own films. Not entirely sure how well that could work out, but it could do a lot to help alleviate some of the confusion and possible audience fatigue. However, while she might fit best within a Madam Web Charlotte Witter storyline in the movies, Jessica Drew isn't the only one who could fill this role. Silk is another Spider-Woman-esque character who could slot into that place. Though she hasn't ever gone under the title of Spider-Woman, she does fit basically the same niche. And here I don't just mean a female-presenting spider-person, though they do have that in common as well. For this, we've got to look at her connection to Madam Web, specifically her time as a member of the Order of the Web, a super team made up of spider people brought together by Julia Carpenter, aka the second Madam Web, who, if I had to venture a guess, will more than likely be the version of the character that Dakota Johnson is going to play. And if Carpenter is going to bring in some other spider people to help her out in the Madam Web movie, Silk would make sense as one who could pop up. Plus, on top of that, Sony has already talked about doing something with Silk, mainly a television series, but it could work out. Here's one that we have basically zero evidence for, but you know what? It would be really cool to see it, so why not? Let's throw it out there. One of the standout characters from Into the Spider-Verse, besides Miles Morales, was Gwen Stacy's Spider-Woman, or as she is often referred to within the comics in order to avoid confusion with the other Spider-Women, Ghost Spider. It wouldn't surprise me in the slightest if Sony decided to bring this character in via some of the multiversal shenanigans that they got going on, especially if they brought the Amazing Spider-Man films back into the fold, as she could serve as a pretty powerful emotional sticking point for Andrew Garfield's character, even if she isn't played by Emma Stone, because it has been a while and she might not be interested in returning to the role. Couldn't blame her if she didn't want it. If you're someone who's been paying attention to Sony's plans for their Marvel universe, you probably heard me talking about Silver Sable at the top of this video and was wondering where Felicia Hardy, aka Black Cat, was. Well, she's right here. This entry is about Black Cat. Are you surprised? Back when Sony was looking to produce their original run of films alongside Amazing Spider-Man 3 and the like, Silver Sable was allegedly going to be teamed up with Black Cat for their own movie. Then plans apparently changed, with each of the two leading ladies getting their own solo films. Then the movies were completely canceled, then they weren't. It's all a little bit confusing. But it's obvious that Sony is interested in the character, so much so that she technically already made her debut. That is, if the Amazing Spider-Man movies are indeed connected eventually. Felicity Jones portrayed the character in Amazing Spider-Man 2, playing a rather shifty assistant for Harry Osborn, who obviously had some ulterior motives. Motives that we never really got to learn any more about. So if they did choose to continue the Amazing Spider-Man movies as part of their universe, this is something they could revisit, finally tying up an 8-year-old hanging thread. Holy crap, is it really that old? Why do I suddenly feel ancient? This one is probably a no-brainer to a lot of you, but since it hasn't been 100% confirmed to actually be happening, I felt like I should bring it up. Especially since most casual audience members might have absolutely no idea who this is. In Venom: Let There Be Carnage, near the end of the movie, we got a hint at the existence of yet another symbiote, when Detective Patrick Mulligan somehow survived something that he probably shouldn't have. Most people assume that this symbiote is going to be Toxin, which would make sense since that is the symbiote that Mulligan bonded to on the page. This particular symbiote is kind of like Venom, in that he's a bit of an anti-hero, often facing off against the baddies, as opposed to being someone like Carnage, who is just straight up evil. So if Venom 3, which we know is in the pipeline already, features this symbiote, expect to see him more than likely initially facing off against Venom and Eddie Brock, before eventually teaming up with him when an even bigger foe presents itself. Or maybe in that movie, Venom will turn heel and start doing bad stuff in order to, try to draw out Spider-Man or something like that. Leading us to yet another direct CGI goo monster battle, this time with Toxin, where Toxin is on the right side of things. Could be an interesting twist on it all, and a way to have Toxin still serve as a hero of sorts while setting up Venom and Spider-Man's eventual showdown, which we all know is gonna happen because, come on. Despite being within the MCU, and not alive anymore, Jake Gyllenhaal's version of Mysterio is reportedly a character that Sony has been eyeing as someone that they might want to potentially base a movie around. Which I guess could actually work out, as when you think about it, while he's technically dead within the Marvel Cinematic Universe, because the Sony universe is its own separate thing, there could be a version of Quentin Beck there that is still alive and well. However, this variant of the character would have to be a bit different from the one that we got in Spider-Man Far From Home. For starters, nearly his entire origin would have to change, as there is presumably no Tony Stark in Sony's universe. That's an easy fix though. Just have him be closer to his comic counterpart, with his story beginning as a special effects artist who uses his skills to become a criminal who masquerades as a super being. Beyond that though, I'm not really sure what a Mysterio solo movie would really look like. He makes for a great baddie, don't get me wrong, and an interesting character, no doubt, but some of his best work is done when he's part of an ensemble, not on his own. Speaking of which, listen, we've known for a long time that Sony desperately wants to assemble the Sinister Six on the big screen. They blatantly set it up at the end of Amazing Spider-Man 2, and even after that series came to an abrupt end, they still talked about it as something that they wanted to eventually make. So, of course, within this universe, they're already laying the groundwork for it, with Vulture and Morbius teaming up during that end credits scene. And presumably, Kraven the Hunter will be joining during his solo movie. So, that's already half the team. Who else could be there? Venom would make sense, though it would take some setup to explain him breaking bad, which is doable within his third movie. So from there, we've got 2 open slots. If Mysterio does debut, he'd be an easy get, so who's really left? Well, the Sony universe could go a couple ways with it. Doc Ock would work really well, and make comic fans pretty happy, since he's a staple member of the group on the page. Green Goblin would also work out, and since Harry Osborn is still technically around if they connect the Amazing Spider-Man movies, he'd be a really easy get. Either way, regardless of who they get, I think we'll see the baddies popping up in their own movie before eventually teaming up as part of the Sinister Six. That seems to be the structure that Sony is going with their universe. It's kind of a reverse Avengers sort of situation, which honestly, I'm all for. Putting the focus on the villains as opposed to the heroes is actually a pretty interesting way to assemble your superhero cinematic universe. Hey there everybody, I'm John Aljets. I made this video and I want to know what you think. What characters do you think will make their appearance within the Sony Marvel universe? Be sure to let me know your thoughts down in the comments below, or go ahead and shoot me a response over on Twitter. I'd love to hear from you. Thanks for watching, and be sure to subscribe to CBR for more great videos just like this in the future.